Hello, and welcome to Lesson 3 of the Generative AI course for venture capitalists. Here, we're going to dive into the business applications of generative AI. Now, the field is developing extremely quickly, and it's hard to keep up, so these topics are always evolving. Also, a set of best business practices has not actually been developed yet or adopted throughout the industry, which is exciting because that means there's room for innovation and disruption in how businesses are run with a generative AI lens. As we dive in, we're going to talk about a few high-level use cases and summaries of potential areas where generative AI could be applied. These will be broken up by industry verticals, and they are mostly hypothetical. However, I hope they'll generate interest and insights into the verticals in which you operate. So, diving in, we'll start with media and entertainment. There are a few obvious examples here, and a few non-obvious examples. The first being music. You could generate novel music. You could start your own generative AI record label using some of these technologies. You could create images, custom images of profile pictures, or images for autonomous farming. You could generate video game assets. One of the most time-consuming portions of the AAA video game development process is asset generation. Characters, cars, environments, what have you. There's an idea of hyper-personalization in generative AI for media. Traditional media has been a one-to-many game, where one group produces the content, and many groups, many people, individuals, consume the content. However, we're now moving potentially to a one-to-one model, where the people who create the content are the same people who consume the content. This is both exciting and scary. The exciting portion is, imagine you sit down at night and you say, I want to watch a movie about space pirates. I want it to have lots of action. I want it to be an epic, beautiful movie, lots of colors, amazing music, etc. Halfway through, your partner joins. You say, let's pause for a second. For the rest of the movie, let's make it a little bit more of a love story. Let's make it a little bit more enjoyable for the both of us. And then you continue, and the movie adapts dynamically. This is the potential of generative AI. From a business perspective, however, it's hard to imagine where the value accrues in this scenario. Another example is bandwidth saving for large streaming services. Imagine you are Hulu, Netflix, Disney, YouTube. A lot of your cost is on bandwidth, sending data from your servers, receiving data from customers, etc. If you have a generative model that can fill in frames, upscale content, produce content on the fly, you could potentially send a much lower resolution or much fewer frames, and then on the customer's end, dynamically, the generative models would fill in the frames or upscale the content, resulting in a huge saving for you. In line with our customization theme, imagine if your browser could customize the content that you see on the fly. For example, let's say you're learning another language. When you browse, you want to either see content in that language or simplify the content in that language with helpful annotations for language learning. Or let's say you want more information dense, or you want there to be more citations, or you want more images, or you want the websites to look a certain way. Your browser could intercept the HTML on the fly and literally rewrite it with a generative model such as Codex to fulfill the requirements that you have set for browsing. Another industry vertical is healthcare. You could imagine generating synthetic CT scans or MRI scans to train models on how to classify different diseases. Or you could use it to train humans. Imagine there's some novel skin disease that you're training dermatologists to recognize. But you don't have images on a diverse population, and so you could synthesize some of those images and train the dermatologist to recognize the disease. You could analyze the toxicity of new chemical compounds by synthesizing those compounds and analyzing their qualities. In finance, you could simulate financial data. Imagine if instead of one S&P 500, you had 1,000. Each one of them slightly different, but built on the back of the same driving process that drives the market itself. You could test for volatility. You could look at black swan events. You could formulate the risk level and robustness of your algorithms or your liquidity levels based on those simulated financial data. In the manufacturing field, you could imagine designing new products or manufacturing processes. You could do material design, where an AI system could potentially be trained on the strength and durability of materials and then conditionally generate new materials with a set of required constraints. Let's say you need a stronger material that's a little bit lighter, but you're okay if it's more expensive to create. Generative models could be trained on a whole database of materials and their properties and synthesize new materials with those properties. Now, these applications are all interesting, they're specific, but there's one general point that I think we need to discuss, and that is the competitive advantage, or some call it a moat, in generative AI. Again, competitive advantages are not well understood, especially in generative AI, and they may be few and far in between, in the same way that they are maybe not as common as people think in the tech world itself. But here I present a few of them, the first being a custom model. A competitive advantage could be that you just have a better model than anyone else. This likely won't be the case in startups. It's sometimes prohibitively expensive to train new models, especially at the internet scale that they need to operate. But let's say you were able to do it. Companies like Cohere or Stability AI have seemed to accomplish that quite well. This could be a really powerful competitive advantage. However, for those of us who don't have data center scale supercomputing, there's the ability to use custom prompts. A prompt is information that you feed to the model every time the generation runs. It's usually static, and you usually add to it at the bottom the user-specified query that the customer has put in. The prompt guides total model generation. So one example, Jasper AI, Copy AI, they used custom prompts when they're just starting out on top of GPT-3 to encourage GPT-3 to write in a certain style or use a certain set of words. This allowed them to take a general purpose model and steer it to be customized for their use case. Something really fun here and interesting in the code generation side, if your custom prompt for the model is a comment at the beginning of your code that says, I am a skilled programmer and I write high quality code. It turns out that the code generated by the model after that prompt will be higher quality, 100% of the time. So custom prompts are extremely powerful. There are some people who believe that prompting is a temporary blip in the generative AI landscape, and that future models will be more robust and not require prompting. That has yet to be seen, but today prompting is an extremely powerful way to control these models. You could also fine-tune an open-sourced model on a proprietary dataset. You may also be able to fine-tune a model that's hosted on an API. This means that you actually train the model a little bit. Either the model has been pre-trained and you have access to the weights itself, or it's been pre-trained and you send them a custom dataset to fine-tune. This, in many cases, drastically improves the performance on the specific task or industry where you are interested. For example, let's say you're a law firm and you have a suite of case notes that you have developed over years of operation. This is an extremely valuable custom dataset that would allow you to train a generative AI for legal documents. This could be quite the competitive advantage that other incumbents would have a challenge replicating. Now, there is some debate as to whether custom datasets are sufficient, or if the large players in the space, such as Microsoft or Google, who have internet-scale datasets would be able to get by with just a general-purpose model. In general, it's well understood that fine-tuning models always does better. So if you do have data, you can improve your performance regardless of the competition by fine-tuning on your custom dataset. Now, there are other competitive advantages that are less generative AI focused, like an improved user experience or better brand and marketing. In general, it seems like the competitive advantage might be similar to the beverage industry. You have a few large players who have custom formulas, and you have many, many bottlers who use those formulas. Maybe they tweak them a little bit, usually they don't, but sometimes you can. And so in this case, there's a few model providers, and there's a whole series of application builders, product-focused companies that build on those models. It could also be the case that open source models achieve parity in performance, and you never use a monolithic provider. Everyone uses custom models, and everyone is able to develop their own moat and competitive advantage that way. It's too early to tell, but it's exciting to see it develop. So, aside from this discussion on the moat and competitive advantage, what are the potential monetization strategies? Maybe surprisingly or not, they are not different. They're really not that much different from existing business models. You can have a usage-based model where you charge users every time that they generate some new content. You can have a subscription-based model where the user uses your app, they don't know that there's a generative model powering it, and they just pay a subscription as usual. Or, of course, you could do ad-supported. Now, there is an interesting question here with the ad-supported model. How would ads work in something like ChatGPT? I think this is a great time for a small thought exercise. Pause, take a moment, think about it. How would ads work in a chat assistant system? One example I can think of, imagine you are a large e-commerce company and you're trying to integrate with the best chat system that exists. Potentially you could have a list of affiliate links to products on your platform that could be inserted into conversations as suggestions based on the customer queries. Now, of course, there are regulations that require the disclosing of ads, and that could also be integrated into the chat product. An additional question is, there are many established companies. So how could existing products benefit from generative AI? I will present a list here. There are many more examples. The first being automated report and summary generation. If you want, at a glance, to know how your company is doing, generative AI could synthesize text describing the metrics of this month or this quarter. In the same vein, you could ask for customer feedback or synthesis. Let's say you look at all of the thousands of reviews on your product, and you ask a generative AI to synthesize what is the common customer feedback action items that we can take. Summarize them for me, and you can then align your team around that. You could generate novel designs, as are pictured here. This is from Midjourney, asking it to generate app designs for a travel app. This might be prohibitively expensive to do traditionally, but your design team, powered with these generative products, could quickly iterate on very interesting and novel designs, potentially personalized for users. You could generate user behavior and test your app. Test it for corner cases that you may not have encountered when you were doing development. An obvious example is customer service, such as ChatGPT, to answer customer questions and queries quick and timely. Or, as a final example, automatically generating some FAQ or internal documentation, external documentation for your product. So finally, let's talk about what does it mean for something to be AI native, and how to rethink the current product design process with generative AI at the heart. Essentially, there's a new paradigm emerging for generative AI products. The idea that humans will have to do fewer manual tasks, and so the interface itself might be simpler. There won't be as many buttons, but there will be potentially larger text input boxes. That's because text is becoming the universal interface to software. Historically, we've communicated to our computers through code. But now we can communicate to our computers purely through our own language. We can ask them to perform actions, generate a budget, or even call a friend. The idea now is that everyone can get their computer to work for them without spending the years and years necessary to learn to code. It's extremely powerful. And I believe it allows humans and machines to now share an action space. It allows machines to be well aligned with human intentions, and I believe it is one of the main advantages of the generative AI wave.